Welcome in everyone for a very unique episode of American Joyride with a guest that I have deep, deep ties with, Richie McGinniss. He is the author of Riot Diet. I have an advanced copy. This is not for resale, as you can see. You can get it on Amazon. It's right there. You can see it over his shoulder. It's a great book, and we're going to dive into essentially the baseline of why he wrote it, what it's about, and it's the best firsthand look at the riots that consumed America just a few short years ago. Feels like a different lifetime already, but not as long as you would think. Richie,
Like a dream.
welcome in.
Thanks for having me. Feels like a dream, maybe a nightmare.
Yeah, well,
Depends if it
we
was
have
peaceful or mostly peaceful.
we have a lot to discuss, but I'll set the background here. You and I used to work together way back in the day at the Daily Caller. Starting, did you come? You came right after Trump won in
2017
2016,
is May.
2017. So
I
why don't
interviewed in December, but yeah, May of 2017.
so what brought you to the Caller? Let's start there because that's the origin of this story, if you will.
Well, yeah, the origin of the story is the Christian Daytalk, who's our buddy, who was I think he was the White House correspondent at the time, but he was a bartender with me at a bar in DuPont Circle, Mission. Shout out to Fritz Brogan right there. But he was bartending there. I was bartending there, and I was working actually. So I went from studying Arabic at Georgetown in 2008, knocking on doors for Obama, helped turn Virginia blue. So you have me to thank for that. And then I went to work for Al Jazeera Arabic. I studied Arabic there at Georgetown, and so I went to Al Jazeera Arabic, and then I went to MSNBC, NBC as a PA, and then I went to Mark Levin as a video editor on his all online TV show. And I was during the campaign, during Trump's campaign, I was watching Christian Day Talk on the Daily Caller, doing this show called Locker Room Talk, and I saw all the views that it was getting, and it looked like it was filmed through a shower curtain. It was not like, the best as far as production value goes. And so fast forward, I talked to Day Talk during the election and then after the election, and I ended up going to an interview at Daily Caller in early December of 2016. And the night before the interview, I got hit playing hockey, and I had like three gashes in my face from my mask, which was, I guess, malfunctioned. And I had 28 stitches in my face. I was literally in the ER, like waiting for my stitches. Like, Christian, I don't think I made it to the interview, dude. Like, I'm pretty banged up. And he's like, they're gonna love it. So I went in, and Vince Colonnese, who's our former editor in chief, he interviewed me with Neil Patel, who's Tucker's former roommate, and he was the CEO at the time. And I was just like literally walked into the office. I think you were in the office. I don't really remember I just remember walking through the newsroom, and like everybody's just like staring at my face, like because I was gushing blood. And I sat down in there, and I think it was probably because I was concussed, but instead of, I was like interviewing for a reporter job, and instead of pitching why I'd be a good Daily Caller reporter, I was just like, I want to start a video outlet for you guys. And I guess, took about 4 5 months, but started in May of 2017 after that. And as you know, uh, Shelby Talcott, who also worked at the Caller, you might know her. Uh,
I might.
she she and Jorge Ventura, who was an unpaid intern at the time, we ended up covering all of the protests and riots in DC after George Floyd was killed. And, went from DC, then we went to New York, then we went to, we went to DC, then we went to Seattle to the CHAZ, then New York, then Portland and Kenosha, which is where this book ends.
And that is a great introduction because you kind of lay out what we're about to get into here. So the Riot Squad has been written about before. It's not some classified secret. It's known about. I believe there's been, what was it? Who did the hit piece on it? Like that BS hit
Oh,
piece?
yeah, it was Robert Mackey from Intercept.
The
Yeah.
Intercept. Why am I not surprised by that? So you just named off some of the people that were on the Riot Squad, but let's rewind it just a little bit. How did the Riot Squad come to be,
Mhm.
and how did you pitch, I presume, to Patel that you wanted to go do this?
Yeah. Well, the book starts actually with the start of the pandemic, and you were in the newsroom when Trump announced that he was initiating a travel ban internationally, but not domestically. And I had already bought my tickets to Hawaii because we were going remote. And so you were in the newsroom. We were all having our last beers before we went remote. And I went to Hawaii like not knowing what was about to happen. And that chapter is called "The Apocalypse is Nigh" in Kauai, because when I got there, I mean, the waves were pumping. So I was surfing with my buddy and waking up at like 4 a.m. to match up with East Coast time. And the business just exploded. Like, you were a reporter, so you could do most of your stuff remotely, but the video side of things was always like on the ground reporting, like in person stuff, man on the streets. And nobody wants to see a bunch of like 20 something year olds sit in their bedrooms and do Zoom calls about the pandemic. So our business just like exploded overnight. And Neil was rightly, how are we going to keep the ship afloat here? Because, like, how are you guys going to make money now? And so the weekend of Memorial Day, when George Floyd died on, I think, the Tuesday before that, but the protests all started in Minneapolis. By Thursday, there was wide scale arson in Minneapolis, hundreds of millions of dollars in damage. And it spun off into DC, where I was actually in New York at the time with my family. And I saw, Shelby and Jorge were like, "Hey, I'm going down to the White House. There's protests." And I was like, "Okay." And I continue to monitor the situation over the course of the weekend. And Shelby and Jorge captured all this different footage from Leland Vittert, who was at Fox News at the time, getting assaulted in front of the White House. Jorge recorded that. Shelby recorded the fires at St. John's, next to St. John's Church, right, which is like literally, for people who don't know, like right in front of Lafayette Park and right next to the White House, effectively. And so she recorded those fires. She recorded looting. And from that first weekend, I got down there on Monday, which was the infamous Bible photo op, as they called it. They claiming that Trump tear gassed and shot rubber bullets at protesters, which was not true.
So wait,
And
were you there? Hold on. So were you there when the alleged tear gas and all that stuff happened?
yeah, well, I was a block up, so I was like on 16th and I guess I was at, yeah, 16th and I Street, so it was like 2 blocks up from just north of St. John's Church.
So did
And
they disperse? Did they disperse anything into the crowd at
they
all? Did
did,
you
yeah,
hear
yeah. So
anything?
they dispersed, and that's the funny thing. I mean, I go through it in the book, but they dispersed smoke grenades because they're not allowed to use chlorine-based gas in DC, and pepper spray and pepper balls, like the little, it's like a paintball gun, but it shoots a peppery ball that when it explodes, it's like an irritant. But in the claims, and I was actually on the Chiron on CNN, which said Trump tear gases and shoots rubber bullets at protesters. And the protesters were not violent at that time. So that let's be clear on that. But with that being said, it was because of all the looting and the violence that took place right in front of the White House. I mean, literally the whole surrounding area got looted. They decided to shut off Lafayette Park, which is where the Jackson statue is. And so when that first took place over the course of Friday and Saturday, by Monday, park police decided that they were going to clear the park. So an IG investigation was done a year later, which said Trump had nothing to do with the orders to clear the park. Secondarily, the they claim that they used tear gas, which is chlorine based. They did not use that. They used smoke grenades, which are definitely like I've experienced both with my bare eyes, and they're not the same. And then they said that they shot rubber bullets, which a rubber bullet compared to a pepper ball is like a pool noodle compared to a baseball bat. Like, I've been shot by both, and you don't want to get shot by a rubber bullet compared to a pepper ball. Pepper ball will sting. If it hits you in the eye, yeah, it can mess you up, but it's just not comparable. And they actually did like a PolitiFact analysis because Kayleigh McEnany claimed that they didn't use those munitions during the clearing of the park, and they were like, fact check, false. They used pepper balls and smoke grenades, which is basically the same thing, which is not the same thing at all. So that whole thing that was spun up, that really like set the tone for the entire summer of these Democrat run cities with Democrat mayors or governors of the state. And they're effectively saying, hey, we're not going to let Trump and his feds come in here and like mess with us. So we're going to create a lawless zone where people can do whatever they want. And I guess that brings us to the CHAZ, where Shelby and I went, and Jorge as well. And the first thing we noticed when we showed up, what do? They don't. They get there in they seated the West Precinct, sorry, the East Precinct in Seattle, and so the police left and basically ceded an entire 6 block area to the protesters slash the people who then armed themselves. And they didn't put walls up. Of course, they wouldn't use a wall because that's Trump and that's fascist. They put up barriers. So they had barriers and armed guards at the checkpoints. And it's almost like they wanted to enforce their border in Seattle. And so Shelby and Jorge and I were there for about a week. And it was just like, it's like a slow moving train and you're just waiting for chaos to unfold. And CHAZ wasn't shut down until 2 black kids got killed. And so all these companies that are based in Seattle, all these big multinationals like Microsoft or Boeing or Starbucks, they're all running BLM ads. But did they donate to the kids, the families of the kids that were killed, the black kids that were killed, 16 and a 19-year-old in CHAZ? No, they didn't. So
Could you feel the temperature being turned up kind of day by day? One of the examples I use is you'll often, going to war and what you did aren't the same thing, but there are similarities between the two of them. One of the things you'll often hear is when guys go overseas, they say you can feel the water, it starts boiling, and something inevitably really bad is about to happen when you reach that boiling point. Could you feel, you said it's like a slow train, could you feel an inevitability that something really bad is about to happen here?
yeah, definitely. There's actually a really weird proxy to Kenosha where um, we were filming actually a fight right inside of the CHAZ, right in the middle, right in front of the police precinct that was abandoned. And Shelby was doing her classic move, and she was like holding her phone with the straps of her backpack. So like, just, I'm not really filming. I'm just kind of holding on here. And she's filming this fight, and I'm like worried that Shelby's going to get, people are going to realize she's recording. There, people are already turning around and seeing other people with big cameras and telling them to delete the footage. And we heard these screams, and I saw Jorge run and ran after Jorge. Shelby and I took off after him, and we got there. It was this auto shop, which Rittenhouse was defending an auto shop as well. And there were about 100 people outside of the auto shop, and they were smashing into the fence surrounding it. And there were like 15, 20 people inside of there. And there was a guy with a rifle standing in front of the auto shop. And I climbed over the fence and got in there, and Jorge was like right up in there with his cell phone filming an interview with this guy. And basically, what they said was some guy came into the business across the fence and was trying to light fire to the business. And the guy was actually sitting there on the pavement. And they were like, we were waiting for police to come. The police, of course, never came because it wasn't in the CHAZ, but it was too close to the CHAZ, I guess. And so the police never showed up, and these guys had to defend their business with a rifle. And the mob did not break down the fence, probably because the guy was better armed than they were. But there was this moment where it was like, what would have happened if they had have actually broken down that fence and actually gone in there? And it would have been a situation similar to what happened in Kenosha a couple months later. This was in June, so that would have been like 2 months later.
So you're telling the audience that the police essentially they were not responding to 911 calls. These people were on their own. The innocent business owners or
Yeah.
just people walking around.
Yeah.
Does that not seem crazy? Doesn't that invite chaos?
In hindsight, it certainly seems crazy. At the time, people were so apoplectic based on stuff like the coverage of Trump in front of St. John's Church. And Carmen Best, who was the first female police chief and the first black police chief in Seattle, I read her whole book, and she basically seeded this police precinct in the spirit of, quote, de-escalation. So there was that whole, and that's why I wrote the book, because like, it's hard to put people into the mindset of how crazy things were at that time. And I want them to be able to pick it up in 20 years and like read it and be like, wow, that's that one year when everybody went freaking crazy, because the idea of ceding a police precinct to just this lawless zone where it's like it's called Lord of the CHAZ, that chapter, because it's like Lord of the Flies. And one of the most poignant moments in that chapter is when we followed protest from the East Precinct to the West Precinct, which was still occupied. And that's in the commercial district of Seattle. And so we marched like about a mile down there, and we're filming this protest. And there's this moment where these guys are giving the middle finger to the police in this little two-story precinct in the midst of this massive commercial district with all these huge like towers surrounding us. And we're literally in the setting sun in the shadow of the Amazon headquarters. It's a three-tower complex, this massive place. And Jeff Bezos's revenue literally doubled during the pandemic. It was like something like 10 million to 19 billion dollars. And so all these people are protesting the blue collar cops and giving them the finger. And meanwhile, all the businesses are shut down, and the corporate entities that are benefiting from this while they're running BLM ads are literally, casting a shadow across our protest.
Very symbolic. At this point, we're going to get into Kenosha here soon, and we're going to build up to it a little bit. At this point, had you witnessed anything that genuinely unnerved you or was
Yeah.
so unsettling that it made you extremely nervous?
Well, right when we got back from Seattle, we were back in DC, and the unsettling thing that we filmed on was like late June, was I don't know if Shelby was there. I know Jorge and Sognick were there, and Sognick used to work at the Daily Caller as well, and he now works with you. But at the time, he was living in my house, and there was a protest in front of the White House, and we went down there, and they were burning a flag, as the BLMers did often at that time. And there was a group of like people filming it. One guy had an especially big camera, this big Canon camera, and the the group of protesters, now I think it's safe to call them rioters at this point, they surrounded the guy and they said, you got to delete your footage. And the guy refused to do it. And Sognick got the shot. He was right up in there, and he just got sucker punched in the back of the head.
The
And
guy who refused to, not Sognick, the guy who refused
no,
to
no,
delete his
yeah,
footage.
sorry, yeah. So the guy who refused to delete the footage got sucker punched in the back of the head, and he was still clutching his camera, but his head hit the pavement, and he got up, and the guy, like, I know what a concussion is, and this guy was seriously concussed, and that was the realization that if you're filming stuff that's unsavory, they're not going to want that. And actually, there was a repeat of that same situation in New York with Shelby and I, where we filmed a fight inside of the occupied protest that was in front of the City Hall of New York. And they wanted us to delete the footage. And Shelby, obviously, former pro tennis player, tough girl, she did not want to delete it, as is her right. She was on a public street in the United States of America. But I remembered that situation, and I grabbed Shelby and literally dragged her out of the area to like to where the cops were, just only a block away. But the crazy thing about these areas is like you might have the cops on the periphery, but crazy stuff can go down just a block away without
Right.
them noticing.
Right. Well, that's what we're going to, I mean, that's certainly happened in Kenosha. Now, I noticed in the background of your book there over your shoulder, because you're talking about people getting punched in the head, fights, danger. I know you guys end up acquiring some bulletproof vests
Yeah.
after Kenosha. At this point, what are you wearing in terms of gear?
Okay. So we got the gas masks before Portland, because Shelby and Jorge went to Portland before I did. And Shelby has this line. She's like, yeah, the tear gas in Portland hits different, like as if it's some sort of like more potent drug. And it is just the funniest comparison, because it really did. So at this moment in Seattle, we had nothing. I was wearing literally like a hockey helmet that I had taken the mask off because we weren't playing hockey during the pandemic. And so I was wearing a hockey helmet for half of the BLM stuff. by the time we got to Portland, upgraded to a gas mask, and we got the helmet that you can see in this photo right here was like a $39. We went to a military surplus store in Portland and got these like plastic helmets, which, for like bricks and stuff like that, yeah, it might help. But if, it's not going to stop a bullet, that's for
Yeah,
sure.
it's essentially just a bump cap. I mean, that's
Yeah,
all it is.
exactly. And so we
It's
had
not
the gas
bulletproof.
mask and the plastic helmets. And then after Kenosha, obviously, once the bullets actually started flying, that was when we got our bulletproof vests and all that stuff.
So let's now kind of transition into the Kenosha part of this story. So George Floyd's already happened. George Floyd was in May. Kenosha was in what? September?
Kenosha was August 20, the night of the shooting was August 25th.
Okay, so August. So you're what? Three. So we're about 3 months removed, almost exactly to the day, 3 months removed from George Floyd. Now, I do want to
Yeah.
paint a little background here because obviously I'm from Wisconsin. People watching this know that. And where you were going wasn't particularly close to where I grew up, but I knew enough about the state to know that it was going to be different than other places. Do you remember the advice I gave you in Shelby before you went?
I don't remember before. I remember you gave me plenty of advice after the shooting. What was
I
the
said I said that people in Wisconsin are not going to tolerate their cities getting burned down and have a shitload of guns. And I'm paraphrasing, but that was essentially the message. And everyone told me I didn't know what I was talking about because I hadn't seen what you guys had seen in New York and elsewhere.
Yeah.
And the other piece of advice I gave you was Culver's. So before we jump into everything, I need your honest review of Culver's live for the audience right now.
Culver's was fantastic. I would put it, I guess, I have a special place in my heart for Whataburger, but if I'm gonna like pick one, it's gonna be either Culver's or In-N-Out Burger. And I know like people are gonna be like, oh, California stinks and yada yada yada, but In-N-Out, it's pretty good. I would say Culver's fries and the cheese curds is a whole nother realm that doesn't exist in other fast food joints. Cheese curds are fantastic. So actually, in the book, I tell the story of when we first went to Culver's, which was after the shooting, and I got Spotted Cow, which is the beer in Wisconsin, and I guess it's like the Miller Lite of Wisconsin, right? Something like that.
Well, Miller Lite is the Miller Lite of Wisconsin. Miller Lite's from Wisconsin. So,
No,
Spotted,
Miller Lite it was now it's owned by a
yeah, but
multinational.
it's still brewed in Milwaukee. It's
It's
owned
yeah,
by Coors
Molson.
Molson or Molson
Yeah,
Coors,
yeah,
whatever the order is. Spotted Cow is brewed by this place called
yeah. An
New
actual
Glarus
local
Brewing,
brewery.
and
Yeah.
they don't sell it outside the state. I like it. I don't think it's as good as everyone claims it is, but people drive up to the state to buy it and then drive home. It's crazy to me. Well, I'm glad that you give a full endorsement of Culver's.
Yeah,
That was
full
the only
endorsement,
goal to get out of this today. No, I'm
especially
just kidding.
after witnessing a shooting. Yeah.
Well, that let's talk about that now. Set the backdrop. You're kind of seasoned at this point. You've been to all these different places, but you haven't really been in a situation where you were a fraction of an inch in either direction from getting, hit by
Well, we were pretty
gunfire.
close in CHAZ. There was a
Figure you
Proud
were.
Boys beatdown where Shelby and I filmed it. Half these guys were on probation, and the guy who's getting beat up went for the gun, but he didn't get it. So it was a similar situation there. Again, another parallel between the CHAZ and Kenosha, but he was close. He went for the gun. Like as he was getting beaten down by these four different Proud Boys, one of the guys had a pistol on his hip, and the guy you could see in the video, and we didn't realize this until after the fact, that he reached for the weapon. And so in Kenosha, it was obviously a very similar situation where just by happenstance, Shelby and I had recorded. So we got there on the second night of rioting in Kenosha, and the shooting happened on the third night. But on the second night, Shelby and I were walking through, there were burning cars everywhere, and there were these guys using power washers in front of one of the auto shops. And it turned out to be Car Source, which is the business that Kyle was standing in front of originally. And there were guys using power washers and literally trash cans full of water and trying to put out these vehicle fires. And we asked, hey, what are you guys doing? And the guy stopped the power washer for a second and he was just like, you see any fire department? And he just continued with his work trying to put out the fires in these cars. And so there was the volunteer fire brigade that night. And then the next night I recorded the police push the protesters away from the front of the courthouse where they were protesting. And it was the same, basically the same thing as the previous night. They got scattered out into the commercial district and they started burning stuff. And I went inside to get cell phone service on my phone, and I immediately saw that there were armed individuals in front of that same business. So I was like, this is an extension of the same story. We had volunteer fire brigade the first night we were in town, the second night of rioting, and now we have like volunteer police. So I ran out, and yeah, Kyle was the first guy that I saw. And
But let's rewind it just for people watching this who might
yeah,
be unaware. What happened that sparked
yeah.
the riots in Kenosha? Take it away.
So Jacob Blake was a black man from Kenosha who had a warrant out for his arrest for the domestic abuse, sexual assault of the mother of his children. And police got a call that Jacob Blake was back at her house. And she, in the 911 call, said, "You guys got to get down here. I'm afraid for my safety." And the video that came out on the internet shows Jacob Blake trying to get into a car and get shot 7 times by cops. And so the narrative that came out was he was shot 7 times in the back while he was in front of his kids.
For seemingly no
What?
reason.
Yes, and what was not included in that video was that he was tased twice right before that. According to police, he was armed with a knife, and that the kids that he was shot in front of were actually the kids of the mother of his children who had just called police, and that he had an outstanding warrant for his arrest. And the NBA canceled games. They had these shirts that were made with 7 shots in the back. He was shot 4 times in the back and 3 times in the side. And so that little clip sparked this national outrage and sparked the protests in Kenosha. But that clip didn't show the tasing that happened beforehand and the wrestling that happened with police before he was trying to enter the vehicle.
Or that
And
he was armed with a knife,
yeah,
which the
exactly.
DOJ determined.
Yeah, but those kinds of facts didn't matter at that time, and so it created these protests in Kenosha, and that it started on he was shot on Sunday afternoon and or morning, and then the protest started on Sunday night, and we arrived on Monday, and the shooting happened on Tuesday. So, it only took 3 days for things to spiral into what happened in Kenosha.
Did you know going into Kenosha that that video was not the full story, or did you believe at the time? I guess I'm asking, did you know that Jacob Blake had been armed, had
They said
instigated the
he was
situation?
armed. Yeah, so we knew that he was armed. I didn't know the and the NBA was doing all this stuff. That I think it actually happened. The NBA protested right after the shooting took place. But there was this national outrage, and we knew that it was a similar situation to George Floyd, which is you have the video, but then you also have there's a deeper story behind it, and it's not everybody wants to put, especially at that time, wanted to put like all these crazy tragic situations into a neat little box of their narrative that fit their worldview. And so as all the BLM stuff was happening, this was all basically framed within that context. So we definitely knew, like, I mean, but it didn't matter because that was our job, was just to go and record our cameras and relay the footage to the public. So like you had to almost have a separation of like your job is literally not to be emotionally affected by that and just sit there and be a fly on the wall and record what's happening.
So let's go to the night then of when the shooting occurs, when Kyle Rittenhouse shoots 3 people during a riot. Obviously, all hell breaks loose. At what point of the day do things start turning poorly? Is it when the sun goes down?
Yeah, definitely. But we actually were out. We must have, by happenstance, passed by. I know because I corroborated the timestamps on the photos that were taken. But Kyle Rittenhouse was cleaning up the high school, which is right next to the courthouse, and it had been vandalized. And so he was cleaning up the high school, but we were walking through the community filming the aftermath of the first night that we were in town, the second night of rioting. So during the daytime, actually, Kenosha differed from all these other places where in Portland you'd have graffiti and stuff and city workers would come out. But this was the whole community. Like you had literally, as Shelby interviewed, a like 12-year-old kid who had come out to help the businesses clean up the damage and the burning and the shattered windows and all that. And so Kenosha had come together on that day, and we had like this kind of warm and fuzzy feeling of like, wow, this is different from all these other big cities where look like these people are all coming out to help. And that night, yeah, it was the same rigmarole of everywhere else, which is like you have like a large number of protesters, most of whom have good intentions. And then the sun starts to set, and a smaller group of people stick around and they start smashing into the fence because they actually had built a fence around the Kenosha courthouse during the daytime. And they start smashing into the fence with the intention of antagonizing police. They shoot the pepper balls, the tear gas comes out, people get angry. Most of the people in Kenosha were much less prepared than they were in places like Portland, where everybody had a gas mask if they were out at 12 a.m. But these people were less well prepared, and people get mad when they get tear gas. That's just kind of a thing that happens. And the other thing that we noticed on that night, not only were there greater numbers, but all kinds of local people on the ground were saying, these people aren't from here. They came from elsewhere. And what came out in the trial is like, yeah, a lot of these people were from Chicago and all, different urban areas, Milwaukee. Then they came into Kenosha with this specific intention of like, okay, this is a power vacuum. Let's go have some fun. And that night, like I said, I walked out from the hotel where I saw these armed men in front of the business, and I walked up to the car source, and I was like, "Does anyone want to do an interview about why you guys are out here?" And Kyle Rittenhouse was standing right there, and he's like, "Yeah, I'll do it." And so I interviewed Kyle for 3 or 4 minutes about why he was there. He had a med pack. He said he was EMT certified. This came out in the trial. Like, I asked him a couple different ways, like, really? Like, he's just like, I call him, I told the police the night of, he's a baby face. I thought he was in his 20s, but it turns out he is 17 years old. And it just seemed to me like he was not, you know, a seasoned enough looking guy to having been an EMT. So it turned out that he was not an EMT. And he told me on camera, oh, yeah, no, well, I have my ALS, which is like an aquatic lifeguard certification. And that's not anything comparable to what kind of training you would go through for an EMT. But with that being said, he had these like almost naive good intentions of he had his rifle and he had his med pack, and he's like, yeah, I'm here and I got my rifle to defend this business and I got my med pack to help the protesters. I mean, he was literally out there with the intention of providing medical attention to the protesters. So he was like, yeah, we're going out there to see if anybody's hurt and see if I can help anybody. And this other guy, Ryan Balch, he was this much more seasoned looking dude with tattoos and big arms, and he had a rifle as well. And he was like, "Yeah, we're going out." And so I was like, "Oh, okay, can I come along?" And they invited me along. So I was following Kyle with my phone, and he's shouting, "Medical! Anyone need medical attention? Medical!" And if it had been my younger brother, I would have said something. I would have been like, dude, it doesn't look like people want you out here. There's some bad mofos. Like, I don't know. This doesn't feel good. But my job in those situations was to be a fly on the wall. So I was walking behind them, and these four guys shouted at Kyle. They were like, yo, you think you're in a movie, dude? You think you're cool with your rifle? Like, we remember you. And so clearly he had a confrontation with these guys earlier in the night. And I wanted to hear their side of the story. Like, that's my job in these situations is like, Kyle says he's out here for all these reasons. You know, he has good intentions according to his own mind, but these guys are mad at him. So why are these guys mad? So I went over to them and I aimed my phone at them and I was like, yo, what's up, guys? And one of the guys had bricks in his hands. He stepped out on me, and another guy had a handgun in his waist belt. He was like squatted down on the ground, and I felt threatened. And there was four guys and me, and I was like, took two steps back to keep my distance and used my break glass in case of emergency move, which is I would always bring like cigarettes and White Claws to the BLM stuff. When it got to the Proud Boys, it would be Budweiser. Well, yeah, it would be Budweisers mostly for
Were
the
you? Was
for
it
the Proud Boys.
cigarettes because Zinn hadn't been invented yet?
No, I had actually, that's in the book. I had Zen. Yeah, I did have Zen. And I put some of those, I was in the police station until 4 a.m. So I go through exactly how many Zen were consumed. But in my gas mask pack, I had, yeah, my little like ice breaking kit. And so I had all of the tobacco and the nicotine and the alcohol in there. And I had two White Claws. And I was like, does anyone want a White Claw? And the dude with the handgun in his waist belt, he actually stood up and thought it was hilarious. And I was like, yeah, man, yeah, I'll take a White Claw. So I pulled the White Claw out, I cracked it, gave it to that guy. And then like, at that point, it diffused the situation. Like the guy with the bricks, like the other three dudes, like looked at him like, oh, you think you're tough, dude? Like, look at how scared this guy is. Like they thought it was funny how cagey I was in that situation. And so I cracked the White Claw, gave it to him, and my phone, I put it away. So I wasn't threatening with interviewing them on camera. But I was like, yo, what's up, dudes? Like, just tell me why you're mad at that guy. And right as they start explaining something about a business, I guess it was the church that's right up the street. They he came up to them with the rifle and told them to stop. I guess they were smashing cars and stuff like that. And right as they were telling me this, I see Kyle running down the street with the AR in one hand and a fire extinguisher and the med kit. So now he's got the role of volunteer police officer, volunteer EMT, and also volunteer now fireman. And so I'm like, well, wherever he's running, I guess I got to go. So I just said, all right, dudes, I got to go. Sorry. And rolled, and ran off behind Kyle. And I was running down the street and I actually called Shelby. And I was like, I don't know what's up, but something's about to go down. And where are you at? And Shelby's not notoriously not great with directions. But in that moment, she was like, oh, I think I'm on Sheridan. And she was just up the road. So I was like, okay, she's close. Right in that moment, as we're pinpointing where we both are and how we can meet up, I hear yelling, and Joseph Rosenbaum came from a dark portion of the street. There's like street lights, but they're kind of spacey, and in between the street lights, he was in this dark area, and he ran out after Kyle, and Kyle saw him running after him. I just heard screaming, and I told Shelby, "Oh, F word, I gotta go," and hung up on her. And I thought that I started the video on my camera, but I would later find out that I took a photo of the ground. And at that point, Joseph Rosenbaum was running after Rittenhouse, and he chased him into actually, which is apparently why Kyle was running down the street. There was another car source business owned by the same owners of the business that he was defending originally, that where people were burning cars. So that's where he was heading with the fire extinguisher. And Rosenbaum chased him into the parking lot of this car source. A pop went off, and I didn't know at the time. I told the cops, like, yeah, I heard a pop, but it was actually a gunshot.
And
And
that was coming from behind you, right?
it was, I think, Kaminsky was his name, but it was actually like, because I'm running after Kyle and Rosenbaum, so I'm behind Rosenbaum, and Kyle turned around in the moment that this happened. So this is to my left. So the car source business is to my right, and there was a pop to my left, to all of our left at this moment. But the moment the pop went off is when Kyle turned around. So now the pop is on his right, and Rosenbaum is still running after him, and I'm running after Rosenbaum, thinking that I'm filming. And this is like a matter of seconds. So like it unfurled so quickly that I didn't even realize, what was about to happen until basically the moment that Kyle was standing with the gun aimed 45 degrees at the ground, stationary, and Rosenbaum was still running after him. And he screamed, F you, and dove for the front portion of Rittenhouse's gun. And he dodged around and shot four shots in like 0.75 seconds. And so from the moment that Rosenbaum yelled at him to that was like a matter of seconds. Rosenbaum did throw like a bag. So there was like a crash during the pursuit. But, there was all these different things going on. There's like 3 seconds from the moment that the pursuit started to when the shooting happened. And I told the police the night of, I was like, yeah, I stepped out of the way of, I saw him dodge and I stepped away and then I felt something go past my legs. Turns out in the video footage, like I guess I rewired it in my brain to give myself some agency in the situation, but I actually stepped to the side right after the shots were fired. And I told police just that I looked down because I was telling them where my eyes were. I saw him dodge and I saw him shoot. I didn't see him collapse to the ground. The guy collapsed to the ground, who turned out to be Rosenbaum, because I looked down and I felt something go past my legs. So the police took that statement. I actually said, quote, did I just get fucking shot? Is what I said to the police. Because I guess a piece of concrete or something skipped off the ground with the ricochet of I think it was probably the first shot. But they turned me into a victim. I didn't ask for that by any means, but they wanted to stack as many charges on Rittenhouse. And so I was a victim of reckless endangerment. And my best friend's dad was a lawyer, and I called him the next day. And actually, as the charges came out a couple days later, was talking to him this whole time. And he was like, you can drop the charges technically, but if you drop the charges, then you're going to be perceived as a biased witness, and basically your testimony will be thrown out. So if you really want to serve the role of witness, then you're going to have to be a victim as well. And the crazy part was the shooting happened. I didn't realize until after the fact that somebody came up next to me and I saw a pair of legs and I was like, "What are you doing? Call 911." And I didn't realize until I saw the video the next day, and I explained in the book, like, Shelby and I realized that that guy who ran up next to me was Kyle. He had run around the car and come back around. And I definitely wouldn't have screamed in that way at him if I had known that it was the dude who still had a smoking barrel of a rifle right next to my head. But I just saw a hand reach into a pocket for a phone, and I turned back to Rosenbaum and I picked him up. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know his criminal history at the time. And I carried him to across the street with another guy, and then there was a dude in front of. There's a hospital literally right across the street, and which was lucky. But I mean, Rosenbaum had no chance because he was choking. His lung had collapsed. The bullet went down his back and through his lung, shattered his pelvis, and he was like choking on his own blood at this point. The guy who worked at the hospital said, "Put him in the car; it'll be faster." And I loaded him into the back, and I was in the back with him as we went on the ramp, and he was basically he was pronounced dead within like 15 minutes of arriving in the hospital. But that whole experience, like I had thought that I recorded the shooting. So I'm in the hospital. I just loaded Rosenbaum onto the gurney. I see Gage Groskowitz come in with like his bicep, almost looked like a surgeon had like surgically removed the
So
muscle.
that's what I, so you do you hear the shots go off in the second and third shooting, or are you
No,
not close
no,
to?
I
So
didn't
you
hear it.
have no I. So you had no
That was the
idea that
craziest
happened.
part was like, so before I talked to police, I had just unloaded Rosenbaum on the gurney and I'm shirtless because I had taken my shirt off to stem the bleeding. And I'm standing there covered in blood, just like trying to take in what just happened. And then all of a sudden, through the hospital doors, in comes this guy, escorted by police with like it. Yeah, it was so surreal because it looked like a surgeon had removed his bicep, and so he was kind of holding it, and the cop was holding it as well, but it was like hanging on by just the bones. And I was just like, what is going on out there? Like, I had just seen this shooting, and now this other guy came in with, I didn't even know what could have like done that to make his arm look like that. And the police officer, one of the ones who escorted him in, they bring him in through the doors. He goes into the ER and he comes out and he looks at me. I'm covered in blood. I'm shirtless. And he's like, what the fuck? What did you do? What just happened? And I was like, I just recorded a shooting. Look. And I opened my phone, and the cop was mad because I had told him I just recorded a shooting. And I looked at my phone, my heart dropped. I was like, I didn't record it. So that was the moment that I realized I'd taken a photo of the ground, and that this thing that I knew was going to at least play out in court somehow. I wasn't going to be able to just show my footage. Like I was going to have to tell people what I saw. And actually, Neil Patel, who was the CEO at the time of the Daily Caller, I called him and told him that I recorded a shooting. And so that was like right before I got interviewed by the cops. But I by the time I realized that I hadn't recorded it, the police were like, okay, you're coming down to the station. And so I went to the police station and like I was in there for like 2, 3 hours before the police finally came in. And that was at like 3:30 in the morning because the
Wait,
shooting.
they set you in a room by yourself. I never knew that.
Yeah,
For three.
I go through like I'm like I put X number of Zyn in my mouth. I repositioned my chair X number of times. I did yoga. Like I have because I have the police footage. It's like 4 hours long. And it's like the first 3 hours just me sitting there, just like pacing back and forth. And I finally like I couldn't sleep, obviously, replaying all the things in my head and finally like was dozing off and the detective finally came in. I am glad that I went on the night up because there are certain things, like I said, the way that you reimagine things, especially once you see extraneous video and stuff like that. Like, the fact that I didn't tell police that Kyle ran back up next to me because I didn't perceive that at the time. I didn't tell them that it was a shot that went off when he turned around. I said it was a pop. So I told them, my most prescient memory of what happened. And I have the footage of that. And it's just interesting because after the fact, you see the footage, you hear all these people talking about it, this and that. And it does pollute the way in which your memory uh, tells you what happened.
Were they treating you as at this point in time, are they treating you as a suspect? Like, do you have your cell phone on you? Are you able, could you have gotten up and left if you wanted to?
I guess I could have. Yeah. And there was a back and forth with the cell phone where they like wanted to download my whole phone, and I was like, dude, that's literally my livelihood. And they were like, we're gonna get a warrant if you don't do it. And so I was like, do you guys know what airdrop is? Because they couldn't download it for some reason. There was like a tech issue, and the tech guy was like, no, I don't know what airdrop is. I was like, what kind of tech guy are you? But the detective had an iPhone, so I just ended up airdrop. I was like, look, everything that I encountered related to the guy who shot the other guy starts right here with this interview. And there's nothing else before that of all the protests that I recorded that has anything to do with this. So I ended up airdropping him the video of my interview with Rittenhouse. It was like two different pieces of video that were 4 minutes each. And then there was the photo of the ground. And also, what I didn't realize until this moment with the cops was that I'd taken a photo of the ground, but I guess I was like holding my phone up thinking I was recording. And then the shooting happened. And I just dropped what I was doing and I put my phone at my side and I clutched it in my hand. And I guess I hit record. So the only video that I had was after the shooting and I'm just over Rosenbaum's body. And it doesn't really show anything. The audio's terrible, which is like I mean, it didn't add anything, any information to the shooting itself, and so I decided not to publish it because it's just this grisly footage of hearing a guy choking on his own blood, and it didn't come out until court. But there were all kinds of Robert Mackey from The Intercept being one, like all these people who were claiming like he deleted the footage to protect Rittenhouse. And that was the craziest part about the whole situation, which was like my role was literally to state the most objective and I was 15 feet away and I saw the dude scream F you and I saw him the other guy standing there and he dove for the front portion of the rifle. He missed and he got blasted. And that objective observation was like turned into like, well, he's got this agenda or that agenda. And yeah, I felt something go past my legs and I looked down. And so by that, just being there and experiencing that, I was both a victim and a witness.
Could you hear the gunshots go off, or was your adrenaline so high, and I guess the frequency of the crack of the rifle? Could you hear them? Like, did your brain process immediately what had happened?
I told police night of that I thought it was 3 or 4 shots. It turned out to be four. So I definitely heard it. Now, when I replay it in my mind, and that's part of what I try to get at in the book is the difference between seeing something through a screen, through pixels on a screen, and actually experiencing it. The most, I guess, the thing that sticks out the most in my memory was the smell of sulfur, of gunpowder, and of burnt flesh. And actually, I went shooting with you in like it was like 4 months later. It was in January. It was like right on New Year's, and I remember we were shooting skeet on the beach, and I was like, I smelled the gunpowder, and it like took me right back to that moment, and like my heart started beating, and like right now, I'm sitting here, I'm recounting this memory. It's like pulling a book off a shelf and reading a book, and each time that you do it, you memorize it better. So it's like that's just a simple recall and there's no like emotion attached to that. But when that memory comes back through the sense of smell, it's it's uncontrollable. You can't control like, oh well, Rosenbaum was this and that, and so it doesn't matter because he deserved it. Like you can't reimagine that or initial impression that's in your brain. And so if you remember, like we were shooting skeet and I was just like, man, dude, like I'm having a panic attack. I decided after that moment, I was like, I gotta learn how to shoot guns better and how to master this because I can't be afraid of this for the rest of my life. Because the worst feeling in the world is being in a place, as I learned, where everybody else has guns or other people have guns and you don't.
You do not want to be the only person unarmed in any situation when everyone else is packing. But what I remember about that day on New Year's Eve on the beach was when that Karen with her dog called the police on us.
Yeah.
That's what sticks out most about that day.
Like
That
I'm just
dumb.
trying to shoot guns on the beach. Come on. What are you?
I also remember that you at when we saw the cop coming, someone asked your buddy, I think
Yeah,
they
they're
asked like,
not
is this legal or whatever?
not the
And he
right
was
shells.
his response was, I think it is. And I was like, I
Yeah.
think it is not what I want to hear right now when the police are rolling up. And yeah, the ammo for that was ridiculously expensive. That was like
Yeah.
$90 worth of shotgun shells. You could
Hey
get them in
man,
Wisconsin for like
it's
10
New
bucks.
York, dude. It's New
Dude,
York.
it's insane. So shortly after the shooting occurs, all these narratives start being formed in the media. Biden very famously puts Rittenhouse in an ad declaring him a white supremacist. You have
Mm.
all these different people in the media claiming that he's a rabid racist. He's a far right wing person. You know way more about him than I do. Is any of that true whatsoever?
No. In short, no. I mean, this is a guy, yeah, he apparently was a supporter of Donald Trump, but that initial fact, because I guess his social media expressed some support for Trump, then he has to be all the things that you said, right? And what happened was, Biden saying this stuff. Both Trump and Biden visited Kenosha soon after the shooting, and it turned into this like hotbed election issue. And it became, if they're going to call him a white supremacist, then we're going to call him a hero. And look, everybody can have their opinions about this or that, but the fact of the matter is, after the trial, so many people came up to me and were like, I didn't know that the guys he shot were white. And it was turned into this race-based thing because it was a Black Lives Matter rally, because it was ahead of the 2020 election, and because this guy who was carrying a rifle, that's, number one, okay, well, he must be a Trump supporter if he's carrying a rifle. And so it was turned into this politicized thing where Kyle Rittenhouse became a caricature and was superimposed into these two different narratives. Whereas the reality of the situation is like, this is just I mean, I don't know if when I was 17, like I should not even have been driving a car, let alone, anything else. And so he had no idea what he was getting himself into. And in the book, I mean, I express a fair degree of sympathy towards the fact that he had good intentions going out there and just didn't realize what he was getting himself into.
Yeah, he had injected himself or found himself in a situation that was completely hopeless
Mm,
and did not have, for lack of a better term, the maturity to understand that all his good intentions ultimately probably weren't going to fix
Yeah, there are
anything.
bad dudes out there.
And but let me ask you this. Is it true that the governor of Wisconsin refused to send in the National Guard prior to the shootings? That's accurate, right?
No, it's not quite accurate. So he did call in the National Guard, and the National Guard arrived really late, like after midnight on the second night of riding.
So
And
the
the
night
third
of the
night,
shoot.
no, the night of the shooting was the third night of riding. It was the night, it's a little confusing because the second night we were there was the third night of rioting. That was the night of the shooting. But the night before that, National Guard arrived like after 12 a.m. and I recorded a clip, like literally six Humvees just sitting in front of the courthouse. They weren't doing anything beyond that. The next night was the same thing. So you had the National Guard, they were stacked around the back of the courthouse, but they did nothing to maintain order in the rest of the city. So he did call in the National Guard, and there was this back and forth where, Trump and this whole thing that we were talking about, we're not going to let Trump and the feds come in. So after the after action was like, he was like, yeah, I called in the National Guard, but it was like the National Guard didn't do anything to stop the burning of all the businesses that were surrounding the courthouse. They were just surrounding the courthouse.
Right, because that was going to be my question. You would think if this all could have been avoided, this entire situation could have been avoided, in my opinion, if there had been law and order had never been allowed to collapse. If they had not essentially stood on the sidelines for lack of a better term. I had a family member, I think you know this, who was a police officer in Kenosha while this was going. He is not a Kenosha officer. He was brought in outside to help deal with the situation. And I don't even think those cops did much, is my understanding, that they pretty much
Well,
sat on the sidelines too.
yeah, I mean, the other thing that's worth noting is the fact that, like, yeah, Washington, D.C., they deal with protests every weekend. So these guys know how to deal with the protest in D.C. But in Kenosha, like what, riot control? Like what? When has that happened before? So it wasn't like that they had, the cops in DC, they're always bookending the protest on the front and the back when they're going marching, and they always have bikers going along the side of the protest. So they always are like babysitting what's going on. But in Kenosha, there was none of that kind of control over the situation. The other weird thing is like the FBI had a Cessna over the top of they were flying over the protest, and they also had DHS had a drone, and all this came out in court. And actually, the one thing I will thank the FBI for is that they had an infrared camera which was filming right at the moment of the shooting, and you can actually see the heat signature of the bullet skip off the ground in front of me. So there were a lot of conservatives who were like, he's lying, he just made it up. And it's like I didn't even think that that was going to get spun up into making me a victim. And I was just telling the cops, yeah, I looked down. I was like, did I get fucking shot? And I stamped my feet. And no, I didn't. So then I ran over, and I just didn't even think anything of it. But all that to say, like the law enforcement, from the National Guard to the Sheriff's Department to the Kenosha PD, you just, if you don't know how to deal with it, then you can't deal with it. So no matter what the numbers are, they were just protecting the courthouse. They had this biggest police line I've ever seen push everybody away from the courthouse. It's 300 cops, like in a contiguous line. And yet, after they pushed them away, you had armored personnel carriers driving through with just like burning cars next to them and not doing anything to stop what was going on. So, yeah, I think it was certainly a failure of not only leadership, but like on the ground handling of the situation.
In the immediate aftermath, in the months, let's go in between the shooting and the trial, which is what we're going to get into next. Did you notice any personality changes or how you handled the situation, whatever it might be? People react to severe situations differently. Some don't react at all. Some people are wired in a way where it doesn't bother them.
Yeah, like
Others,
Shelby.
yeah, for like, yeah. But other people, people go through different things. Did you find that it had a big impact on you, or would you say that not really?
It did. Yeah. And I chronicle that in the book, which is the difference between seeing something through a screen and seeing it in real life. I went on Tucker the next day because I saw a Vice News article that morning. I was at Culver's with Shelby, and it said that Kyle Rittenhouse opened fire on protesters. And I saw this chase happen and I saw the guy lunch and it was just so wrong and so detached from reality. And there was actually at that time, there was video that Drew Hernandez recorded right up the street where you could see the whole chase take place. And then BG on the scene, Brendan Gutenschwager, he filmed the second two shootings. And so like all of this stuff was out there by the time that article was written. And yet there were still these falsehoods being put forth that he opened fire. And so I decided that morning, I got to go and talk in public. And Tucker, being a former founder of the Daily Caller, he was the biggest show at the time, and I figured that that was the best place to go. So I went on there, but I was like, I mean, it's really painful. I had to watch it multiple times to write the book and quote what I said, but it's like, who is that guy? Looking at the screen because that's not me. And so I think I told myself at the time, I'm good, but we were still in the midst of all the chaos. We were recording all the rest of the protests up to the election and then obviously leading up to January 6th. But, after the fact, especially as I was writing the book, it was like that certainly impacted me because that guy on the screen is not who I am. And there were multiple veterans who like DM'd me and were like, dude, I see the 1,000 yard stare and let me know if you need any help or anything like that. And I just brushed it off at the time, but yeah, definitely. It's like, um, the kind of thing that you can't, you know, really, you can rationalize it all you want. But like I said, at the moments that you least expect it, you're going to smell this gunpowder or the fireworks, or you're going to hear a gargle, and that's going to just set you off into this, take you right back to that place in that moment.
Was writing the book therapeutic in that sense that it felt like you had the opportunity to kind of work through this unbelievably serious and traumatic situation? Talk to us before we get into the trial, just kind of mentally and emotionally, what reprieve that gave you, putting it all on
Yeah.
paper and showing it to the
It
world.
was. It was definitely therapeutic because the process of writing the book was basically taking the 3,000 videos that I recorded on the ground and turning it into a story which has inherent meaning. So I had to make meaning of the chaos. And so the process of taking all that crazy footage and putting it into words in a way that makes sense as a story was like, I guess, bring some closure to, well, this happened, but we can learn this. And so I think the process of, and that's why I include some personal anecdotes in the book. Like my dad passed away, as you remember, right at the beginning of when I started working at the Daily Caller. And
Mm-hmm.
the amount of things that I learned about his life after he passed away and learned about the challenges that he faced. And it allowed me to let go of a lot of the, differences that you might have with any loved one that you have, and realizing, well, yeah, I might have had this issue with him, but I didn't realize that he faced that. And actually, him facing those challenges when he was younger was exactly why he was a hard ass, like he didn't want us to end up like his family did, which is torn and broken. And he had two brothers as well, just like me. And both those brothers had substance abuse problems, and one of them died by the time I was 2 years old. And so realizing all that after his death was like a way of coming to terms with all of the problems that you might have perceived at the time. And it was the same thing with Kenosha, which is like, well, you know, these people who were involved with this tragedy, from Jacob Blake to Joseph Rosenbaum to Anthony Huber, the second guy killed, to Gage Grosskreutz, who got his bicep shot off, to Kyle Rittenhouse, all came from broken homes. And it's a deeper story than what was painted in the media, which is like he's either this or that.
Well, there's no question that it's a much, much deeper story, but you know as well as I do that a lot of people in the media don't actually care. They just want their
Yeah,
narrative
that's
once they
exactly right.
figure out their narrative. And it's sad, but unfortunately, that's 100% true. Let's talk about the trial now. You get called as a witness, technically for the prosecution calls you as the witness, right?
Yeah, they did because they knew I was going to be called by the defense regardless. So the prosecution called me so that they could have the first examination. Like,
And so, tell us how you get contacted. How do you find out that you're going to be called as a witness?
so my best friend's dad was a criminal lawyer, is a criminal lawyer, and we were talking throughout the whole thing when the charges got dropped. That's when I found out Joseph Rosenbaum and his criminal history and all that. This was like 5 days after the shooting, and I mean, I go through that in the book of like just the realization that this guy was a really bad person, the guy who I saw die, and it actually made more sense at that point because I was trying to piece together. It looked like the guy, when I saw my dad pass away, it looked like he was going up and it looked like this guy was going down. Like he had regret in his eyes as he was passing away. Whereas my dad chose the moment that he saw the nurse leave the room to depart with his family around him. And so the charges were filed and I realized that I was both the victim and a witness. But it wasn't, I guess it was, you know, I knew that there was going to be a trial because of the charges. The trial wasn't set, but my lawyer was like, well, it's probably going to happen in about a year. It ended up being just over a year for when the trial happened. So there was this like whole intermediary period. And during that time, I was like, they're not going to put it on TV. Like, I'm not going to be on, it's just, I'm going to testify and, there'll be like the court drawings and that'll be it. I just have to tell the truth. And then the Chauvin trial happened um, about 6 months before the Rittenhouse trial. And I was like, oh my, they're live streaming this. Like, this is live on television. And my trial is going to be live on television. And I'm going to have to sit there in front of the whole country. And like, I don't know how I'm going to keep it together. So it was November of 2021 when the trial actually happened. And they subpoenaed me. And my lawyer was like, you're out of state, so technically you don't have to serve this subpoena. But given the fact that I only spoke publicly as far as I had to. I went on Tucker. Um, I went on CNN after they took my words out of context. I fought to get on CNN and I said, have me on to correct the record or prepare for court, basically. And so I'd done a couple of media appearances, and my lawyer's like, well, obviously you have to go testify because you were the closest one to this shooting. And Kyle Rittenhouse's life was literally hanging in the balance. So I honored this subpoena, and Kenosha County flew me to Kenosha to testify, and they put me up in like a Holiday Inn. And the night before I was testifying, I actually flew my best friend's dad to Kenosha. So we met up, we had dinner, went back to the hotel, and I just like couldn't sleep. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm gonna go get a drink and, a little nightcap or something. And I went to the bar, which was right next to this Hampton Inn, and there was it was like, I don't know, 20, 30 people in there, but there was this voice, like I just ordered a beer and he was like, Richie. And I was like, what the, is this guy gonna like, am I about to get like a mob hit before the trial? And it turned out to be an investigator for Rittenhouse's defense. And he was like, hey man, uh, you want to have a drink? We ended up having, I don't even know if like he was trying to sauce me up or something like that, but we had more drinks than I should have had. And he showed me the real reason why I really got after it was because I had this sense of relief. He was like, the FBI recorded this footage from a Cessna, and it's this infrared footage. Look, you can see the bullet skip off the ground. He was like, I thought that you were, bullshitting when I saw your testimony to police, saw the footage, but look, here it is. So you're exonerated on that. And like I had this sense of relief of like all these conservatives have been saying, oh, this bullshit. Like, and so I felt like, okay, like I'm good. Now I can have a couple drinks, and I had a couple too many. And that was probably the best thing that I ever did because the experience of being actually on the stand was like such a infuriate. It's like the kind of thing where you want to, there's all these things of your opinion of what you want to say, but you have to just state what you saw and just the way in which the adversarial system works. The prosecutor was trying to catch me on this and that. He's like, what do you mean? You said on Tucker Carlson that he was falling. And that means basically what he was insinuating was that because Rosenbaum lunged for the gun and then missed, that as he was going from diving to then falling in midair, that implied that Rittenhouse had like shot this guy that was tripped and fell on the ground. And so it was like this incredibly infuriating experience. But the fact that I was hungover actually helped me because I was just like, yeah, no, he screamed F you and he reached for the weapon. So I guess I don't know how exactly that shook down, like whether that guy was trying to get me sauced up for my testimony, but it turned out to, I guess, work out. Everybody knows what happened after that.
Well, you had the most viral moment of the trial when the prosecutor, who's just a raging d bag, said, "You have no idea what was going through Rosenbaum's mind. How could you put yourself in his mind?" Something like that. And that's when
Yeah.
you very famously said, you kind of paused for a little bit, you rolled your eyes back, thinking, and that's when you said, "Well, he shouted, F you or whatever it was, and reached for the gun."
Yeah.
That
Well,
was
I said that I wasn't gonna. I like told myself going in that I wasn't gonna swear, and he had asked that question like so many times in so many different ways, and it was just so obvious. Like the dude yelled at him, chased him, and then he screamed "F you," and he dove for the gun. Like, what else do you want me to say? So that's when I finally swore because I was just like, What do you want from me? I'm just telling you what happened."
Did you think going into it that he was going to get acquitted?
Um, I think it became more. I testified pretty early on in the trial, so at the time that I testified, I did not know. It was, especially given the times. I mean, people, even though it was after the election, it was like people were still apoplectic. The pandemic was still going, and so I really didn't know. As the trial continued, it became more and more evident. But my biggest fear was on the. So he was. The verdict came down, and I think I testified like November 4th, and the verdict came down about 2 weeks later. It was like November 19th. And November 19th, I was in New York. I was at my mom's apartment. And I'll never forget, I was watching the live stream. It was like late in the afternoon. They were like, oh, the jury went out to deliberate. And I was like, well, they're probably going to be deliberating for a while. So, and then all of a sudden they came back out. It wasn't that long, it was a couple of hours. And I just remember sitting there with my mom, terrified of the prospect in Wisconsin. You can be acquitted of self-defense, but still charged with reckless endangerment of another person's life. So it was possible that my testimony was good for the defense, and so far as I saw him scream "F you" and reach for the gun, but they literally asked me like, "What are you going to say when if you get asked if you were afraid in the moment?" And I was like, "I'm going to say yes," and they weren't happy with that because they didn't want for him to, it was up to 12 years in jail for the charge of reckless endangerment of my life. But at the same time, under oath, I mean, I told the police the night of, like, did I just get fucking shot? So I was scared. And so I told the truth and I said I was scared, but that made me for the entire 2 week period after I testified, just absolutely terrified that he was going to get off on all charges except thrown in jail because of reckless endangerment of my life. And if he got put behind bars, I mean, I was already getting death threats from both the left and the right. And let's put it this way. I would prefer to get a death threat from a lefty than a righty because the right wingers are like, I have this gun and this ammunition and I'm going to shoot you when you least expect it. And so I was just terrified that I was going to have to look over my shoulder for the rest of my life. But I just had to tell the truth in that situation. So when the verdict came down, they read all of the different names of Rosenbaum, first man killed, Huber, second man killed, and there was an unnamed victim and not guilty, not guilty, and the charges of reckless endangerment of Richard McGinniss, not guilty. And the only person who was happier than me on that moment was Kyle, and that's for obvious reasons. But it wasn't like I went into the trial with I had to separate myself from the future of my own personal whatever safety or reputation or whatever. I just had to say what was there. So I didn't go into the trial. I had to tell myself, okay, you just got to say what you just say the truth and just say what happened and just separate yourself from that. So that's what I did. But I was extremely relieved afterwards. And I actually like didn't even go on the media till a year later when I went on Megyn Kelly because I just didn't want to add fuel to the flames after the fact. And obviously, there was like this whole media tour that I feel um, I don't want to, it's hard for me to like put my emotions about the after action of the acquittal into words, but seeing Kyle basically get turned into this kind of like right wing hero was, he's this young guy, and it felt like people who didn't have his best interests at heart were using him to gain money and to, gain access to the spotlight. And I just remember there was a TPUSA event that was done in December, and they were like shooting pyrotechnics off and joking about how good his aim was. And that's up to this is America, and people can. He was acquitted, which means not guilty, and he's free to go and do whatever he wants. But for me personally, it was gut wrenching because not that Joseph Rosenbaum was a good person by any stretch, he was actually an evil person. um, it was still a life extinguished before my eyes. And so it's just really hard for me to like say, oh, well, he was bad. So then that's good. And he should have died anyway. And it's just, nobody deserves to, like, no matter who you are, um, nobody deserves to die in that fashion because it was a terrible thing to see.
Do you think when you look back in 5 to 10 or 20 years at this whole situation, the shooting, the trial, everything that came from it, how do you think you're going to remember all this when it's all said and done in terms of what is your biggest takeaway from this insane experience you've been through?
Just the way in which all these people who were taking to the streets were effectively used as political pawns through this whole thing. And from Kyle Rittenhouse to Huber to Rosenbaum to all these guys who were out there who were most closely affected by the tragedy, they were out there because they were disaffected with what was going on. And whether it was whatever side of the political spectrum they came from. And, the media just has no concern for the actual human beings behind the caricatures that they put forth for the sake of scoring points on Orange Man bad or Orange Man great.
I could not agree more with that assessment. And I think now would be a good time to move on to another one of your stories that's absolutely wild. You have a very unique January 6th story in the sense that the New York Times smeared you in front of the entire country, falsely smeared you in front of the entire country. Can you please
After
walk?
relying on my reporting in Kenosha, too.
Right, exactly. Can you please walk the audience through what the New York Times did to you in the battle that unfolded?
Yeah. Well, I guess it starts with I was at home, and actually Shelby went on vacation,
Yeah,
and
she
when
was in
she was
Florida.
like,
Yeah, she was in Florida.
yeah, and she was with her family. She's like, "Do you think anything's gonna happen?" I was like, it'll be like Stop the Steals. It'll be like these skirmishes that happen after dark. Um, so I was at home. I knew there was gonna be no internet service down there with everybody. Jorge was down on the mall. You had to get there like before dawn to get through the Secret Service checks. So Jorge and a couple of other Daily Caller reporters were down there, and I was like managing everything from my house in Georgetown, which is like 2 miles, 3 miles from the National Mall. And I was live streaming Trump's speech, and my girlfriend at the time, now wife, Isabella, who she was working in Congress. She was on the top of Rayburn, and she was like, I see cops running in opposite directions. And so I was like, well, I guess I planned on going down there around sundown when I thought stuff was going to start getting frisky. And I was like, well, I guess it's going down now. So I got my bulletproof vest, my bulletproof backpack, I had all this gear at that point, my ballistic helmet, not a plastic helmet, like a legit ballistic helmet, and a gas mask. And I was like putting it on in the Uber, and the Uber driver's like looking in the rear view, like, what the heck? And I actually brought my skateboard knowing I was going to hit traffic. And so we hit traffic right on Independence Avenue, like a mile, like right by the Washington Monument. So it's about a mile down from the Western Front where all the clashes were taking place. So I skateboarded down there, and I've now reviewed all the surveillance footage. So I can literally see myself on Independence Avenue, like adjusting my helmet as I'm like skateboarding to this riot. And I got there, and my first thought was like, whoa, why am I better prepared than all the cops? Because I had my gas mask and all that. And most of the cops, the overwhelming majority, didn't have gas masks. The MAGA side had pepper spray. They were pepper spraying the cops. They were running away. The cops were pepper spraying the MAGA side, and they were running away. And I was just standing in between. I actually came up to the inauguration tower. There was this skirmish. There's tear gas deployed, and Ray Epps was right there in my footage. I didn't realize until after the fact. But I climbed up on the inauguration tower, and I saw the police line break. And I realized as people were streaming into the building, well, same as all the BLM stuff that we were covering, if it's after curfew and there's nobody out there to record it, like that's literally our job. We're not going to trust the cops or the protesters to tell us what happened. So got to go in. So I saw him going in. I ended up climbing up a wall to get around the line of people going up this conga line, going up the stairs on the western front to the terrace where there are doors to access the building. So I climbed up the wall and I got in there, and I actually ended up, based on the surveillance footage, I was literally like the last person to get in the door on the West Terrace. There was a cop wrestling with another guy right at the door. I mean, I posted all this footage on my Twitter, and you guys can see it if you go to my highlights on Twitter. But I dodged underneath this cop who was wrestling with another guy, and I went in the door, and the door closed, and so I was the last one in there. What proceeded was I went to the house doors. I followed a group of people. There were like 20 people outside the doors, and I was on the other side of where the sergeant at arms had their guns drawn. And there's that famous photo of the guy sticking his face through the broken glass of the house doors. That guy's in my footage. I was right behind that dude. And so in that moment, I was like, am I going to get caught in the crossfire here? And like yet again, like, so I was hiding behind the wall with my camera out. We get pushed away. Finally, the cops got reinforcements. They push us away from the doors and end up in the rotunda, and there's a guy smoking a joint. Like talk about surreal. It's just like that's the roller coaster that this was. There were guys who were, and this is the same as the BLM stuff. It's like, yeah, there were peaceful people, and there were also people trying to break down the doors where the votes were literally being counted. So I went from that situation to this guy who just decided, wow, yeah, this is kind of cool. I'm in the Capitol. I'm gonna roll a joint. So I filmed the guy smoking the joint, which ended up being the most viral video. But then the cops came in, and it was like known now as the Capitol Crush, where there were 50, 60 cops pushing on a couple hundred the MAGA dudes and dudettes, and because there were a fair number of women in there, and they pushed us out of the rotunda, and I ended up at the Capitol House doors on the east side now. Those are those big doors, the Columbus doors. They're literally like 17,000 pound bronze doors that were made in the 1860s. And those were swung open. And the also very heavy doors of like they have windows on them, where one of them was open. So they were trying to force the last group of people, rioters, it's safe to call these last folks, out of the Capitol. And I was trying to film that last push. So I was like right up in front. And I have the surveillance footage now. I don't really remember any of this because of what happened next. I was filming with my phone up, and there was a bunch of people behind me. One guy specifically, this huge dude, was pushing me towards the police who were trying to clear the area so they could close the door. And so I literally got pushed up into the police shields. And when I hit the shields, the police perceived me, especially with a gas mask and a ballistic helmet, as being adversarial. And I was literally just a meat popsicle. Like I was trying to fight against the guy who was pushing me, but there were him and a couple other people who were pushing me forward. And when I hit the shields, they just grabbed my mask, pulled it off my face. I say in the second book that's coming out in early 2025, I'm like, I'm pretty sure was the most pepper sprayed man in American history because in the surveillance footage you can see like 8 different canisters just dousing, and so my gas mask was yanked off, so it all got into my eyes, got on my hoodie, all into my helmet, and I got pushed down to the ground, and I landed on the ground in front of these doors, and my mask was like on the side. I couldn't see, obviously, because I've been pepper sprayed, but also my mask was over my eyes and my helmet was like wrapped around my neck and hanging off. And it's like not a light helmet. So I unclipped the helmet, I ripped the mask off, and I get up. I had lost my phone in that process. And I was terrified that I didn't have my footage from the whole day. Like literally just went through what I knew was going to be a historic moment and I lost my phone. So I was desperate to find it. And I poked my head into the door as it was still open, and the cops were still fighting to push the last people out. And I'm like, "Do you see my phone? You can see it in the footage." I point down, and I thought it was the cops, but as it turns out from the footage, there was a woman who was getting doused with the pepper spray, and she slammed the door to stop the pepper spray, and my head just so happened to be right there. So it hit me in the head, and I just go down. And at that point, you can't see me on the surveillance footage. I'm down for a couple minutes. I was lying on broken glass. I was bleeding. And I walked out to the balcony, which is like right off the east door is like, there are these steps that go down. So the balcony overlooks the plaza. There were like hundreds, thousands of people down below. And I took off. Everything was burning. And so, just as a preface for the viewers, before you ask questions about why I was shirtless at a second American tragedy, there's nothing that feels better than when you're covered in pepper spray and it's 10 degrees outside than just like getting it, all of that peppery stuff off and feeling the cold. So I took off I had a hoodie and then a bulletproof vest, and all of it was soaked. So I took everything off, and there was this couple that was sitting by the balcony, and I was like, "Hey, can you watch my stuff? I lost my phone. I need to go get my phone." And they're like, "Yeah, sure." So I went over, and I mean, I barely remember most of this because I was extremely concussed based on the fact that like a multi-100-pound door just got slammed on my head. But I went back and I tapped on the window of the doors, which are now closed. And I tapped with my finger and pointed down and I said, "Phone, phone." Because I was asking the cops if it had been swept into the doors. "Can you guys look down? Is my phone in there?" And in that exact moment is the moment when the New York Times photographer took a photograph of me. And it looks like my fist is kind of clenched and I have my finger out. And it looks like I'm saying the F word. And I'm shirtless. And I just lost my phone and been pepper sprayed by 8 different cops and had a massive concussion. And I hadn't eaten all day. You know, there's so many compounding factors. I was out of my mind. And he took this photo of the darkest moment of my entire life. And unbeknownst to me, 4 days later on January 10th, one of my hockey buddies texted me and was like, "Yo, dude, did you see the New York Times? Like, is that you?" And my heart just dropped because it was me, shirtless, in front of this door with the cops looking out, and it said, "A rioter who punched a door," is what the caption said. So they called me a rioter, and they claimed that I punched the door, and the window was shattered. I actually, when I got knocked down, I landed on a crowbar, like a pry bar, even longer than a crowbar. And so that must have been, I assume it had to be something heavy that broke those windows. It certainly wasn't my fist. And these like 2 inch thick glass that's shattered. The New York Times caption basically implied that I was the one who shattered that window. And it looked like I was screaming the F word, and they called me a rioter. And so I ended up getting, I don't want to give too much away of the second book, but I got one correction where then they removed rioter. They said, "Oh, he's a videographer for the right wing Daily Caller." And I go through in the book like all of the emails with me and the New York Times head of counsel and New York Times editor in chief. Just after that first correction, I was like, "Are you kidding me? Like, what about the fact that you claim that I punched a door, which is like a federal crime? How can you possibly not correct that?" So they corrected that, but they put in for the right wing Daily Caller. And I was like, that qualifier has nothing to do with correcting the record because what you're trying to do is cover your tracks and imply, well, he's not a rioter, but he's adjacent. He's still a knuckle dragging Trump supporter. So I ended up hiring a lawyer, and I may or may not have gotten a third correction, but you'll have to tune in to the second book to find out the details on that.
Well, I remember that day well, just because I was sitting on a couch at a place that I won't say publicly, watching it unfold. And I was just like, I was like, this is nuts. And I knew you were down there. I knew little old, you remember old small intern who used to live with,
Nieto, he was in the Uber with me,
yeah.
and I was like,
Uh,
"See you, Nieto. I gotta go, dude. I'm gonna hit the skateboard and just be safe, bro."
yeah, he's got some stories from down there
Yeah,
too.
I
We'll
got pepper
probably,
sprayed with him a couple times.
yeah, no, good guy, great guy. Yeah, it's just like that day, man. And I
You
know
know
that
what the most watched day in CNN history was?
was that.
Yep.
I was gonna guess it. I don't know what else would be close. Maybe yeah, I don't know. I don't know what I would have guessed second, but that obviously maybe 9/11 I guess would be up there. But yeah, that makes sense. I want to pivot a little bit to some kind of current events here because I know you're well traveled. You watch the news a lot. You're aware of what's going on. Um, Trump winning 2024. What's your big takeaway from that?
Well, a lot of what we saw on the ground is the reason why he won, which is no matter what side of the political spectrum these people were from, they were disaffected with the system. And Trump ran on a changed platform. And Kamala Harris certainly did not. I mean, when she was asked on The View, like, would you have done anything different than Joe Biden? Who Joe Biden has been a senator for freaking, I don't know, 7,000 years.
Yeah.
And she just didn't even have an answer for that. So it was clear to the voters that Kamala Harris didn't want to change the way that things were going, and people were unsatisfied in 2020 and obviously also in 2024. So Trump's platform of coming in and shaking things up obviously prevailed. And so I think what we saw on the ground in 2020 was really an indicator of the way that voters voted for Trump, to change things.
One of the big claims you hear in the media, certainly from the left wing media, is that, there's going to be a ton of violence. There's going to be chaos, anarchy, more riots. Trump's going to usher in just absolute carnage. Do you believe any of that's true, or do you think it's just the media hyping people up for attention?
Mm. Well, let's put it this way. If you're the incumbent, it doesn't benefit you to have chaos under your watch, but if you're not the incumbent, then it does. So I think starting with the inauguration and moving forward with all the immigration stuff and a lot of the different aspects of Trump's agenda, there's going to be all different touch points for chaos to unfold. So I do agree that the media engages in fear mongering unnecessarily. I don't think, that Trump's going to be like, "Oh, I'm president for life." But with that being said, while he is president over the next 4 years, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for these kinds of protests to spiral off into chaos.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that, well, number one, the media wants that to happen. So they have every incentive in the world to spin it up and pour as
Exactly.
much
Exactly.
fuel on the fire as they possibly
Most
can.
watched day in CNN history. Exactly.
Right. So it's like anything else. The old saying in news is if it bleeds, it leads.
Yep, that's in the book.
News companies can't get enough of this shit. And so I hope I'm wrong. I don't think I will be. I think that this is going to get kind of ugly, but we'll see what happens. Also big in the news currently. I don't know when people watching this, obviously, maybe you're catching this interview after it's been up for a while, but the biggest international story is the fall of the Assad regime in Syria. You've spent quite a bit of time in the Middle East.
Mm.
When's the last time you were over there?
In 2019, but I spent 5 months in Amman, Jordan during the semester. As my junior year of college, but I was studying Arabic at Georgetown, and I spent the semester abroad in the semester right before the Arab Spring. So I was in Tahrir Square a month before all that stuff happened. And I actually tried to get into Syria. I didn't have the proper visa. You had to get it in your own country at the consulate or the embassy. So I tried to like bribe my way over the border, and I was with I stayed with an Israeli family a couple of weeks later, and they were like, "Oh no, you do not mess with Sicilians. That's a bad idea. They will not let you." And so I tried to bribe my way in. It did not work. So my biggest regret of being over there was that I didn't make it to Damascus because it's a historic city, and obviously after I left, the Syrian civil war started, and the place is mostly rubble now. But I think now in the present moment with Assad gone, what people don't realize is the same principle as with the protests is like power vacuums are power vacuums. And it's always the guy who's the most well armed, the strongest, the biggest, who's going to prevail. And it looks like there's not the best actors in that situation right now. And obviously, there's, Syria, it has shares a border with Lebanon, with Israel, with Turkey, and
Iraq.
Iraq. Yeah, so there's Kurdistan, there's all different regional players. The Turks, they're Sunni, the Iranians or Shia, the Lebanese, or there's a fair number of Sunni Palestinian refugees there now, but they were originally a Shia and Christian country. So there's all different sects and factions that are vying for political influence in this power vacuum that now exists. And you see the radical Islamists who are really taking over because, like I said, they're the most well armed. And I just don't think, people are celebrating the fall of Bashar al Assad just like they did the fall of Saddam Hussein. But what I don't think people, especially Americans, don't realize is like when you spend time in that region, it's so tribal that this idea of like, oh, let's bring democracy to the Middle East. It's like, well, you can, sure, but they're just going to vote along sectarian lines. So they're going to vote for their tribe. So whatever the divisions are along those lines, that's how that's going to go. That's who's going to take power is whoever's in the majority. And in Syria, it's a Sunni majority, and so that's why you see a lot of these Sunni Islamist groups that are now taking hold. And it looks like, almost a repeat of what happened when the Syrian civil war originally started. And you obviously had ISIS spring up after that. And I don't think that bodes well for the regional stability. With all that being said, it's there's a weird thing that I realized when I was studying Arabic and living over there, and then just studying the history of the region and staying up on the news. It's like the you'd almost rather have the devil that like from a perspective of being able to project your power in a region, whether you're the Americans or the Brits or the Israelis. It's like if you have the devil that like ISIS, for example, you'd rather have that than the devil that you don't know and can't control. So if you have a bunch of guys running around with AK-47s, that gives you an excuse to project your power into that area. And that was really when I decided, like, I'm not going to work. I'm not going to use my Arabic. I'm not going to work for the government because I don't really agree with anything that they're doing over there. Because with Libya, which happened as well under Obama's second term, right after I graduated college, it's
Well,
just like,
that was right at the end of his. That was right at the end
oh,
of his
it's
first term.
2011. Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
2011.
2011. And so yeah, I was still in college then and I was still studying Arabic. And with all that happening, it was just like they almost want to have that power vacuum because it gives them an excuse to project their power there.
Well, here's the thing about Syria that I want someone to explain to me from the government. Right now, at this very moment, the United States government will pay anyone who can kill the new leader of Syria $10 million. Okay,
Mm,
so if you can kill Jelani, who's the head of HTS, which is just Al Qaeda and ISIS rebranded under a new name to sound moderate,
mm,
if you can kill him, the U.S. government will pay you $10 million
mm.
today. At the same time we're doing that, Biden went out there and said, we're going to give these guys aid to rebuild the country. We're going to give the new government aid. So we're offering to kill the guy
Mm.
and we're funding him at the exact same time. Point two. So number one, I want someone to explain that to me. Point two, Turkey is supposed to be a NATO ally of the United States. We're all supposed to be in this together. Turkey literally bankrolled, trained, and runs HTS and all the aligned
Yeah,
organizations that
yeah,
just took over Syria.
yeah,
So they destabilized the entire country, even though we told them not to. And they're supposed to be our, ally.
yeah.
It's complete nonsense. Can we not get on the phone and tell them to knock this shit off? It,
I
I think,
wish. I wish. Well, it's about this, dude. It's literally this. So yeah, that aid, it's going back into the pockets of shareholders and defense companies. And so that's just keeping the gravy train going. And you're exactly right. There's I mean, it's the same thing that happened in Iraq. We deposed the military and toppled the entire regime. And then Saddam Hussein was a Ba'athist, who's Bashar al-Assad is also a Ba'athist. It's like a secular, technically a secular uh, political party. But because everything is so tribal over there, Iraq is like 30% Sunni, 60% Shia, 10% Kurdish, approximately. And the moment that Saddam Hussein, who's a Sunni, gets deposed and his military gets deposed, all of the Shias who've had their had Saddam's boots on their necks for 20, 30 years, they now are like, okay, it's our turn. So they come out and they're literally killing Sunnis in the streets. And then the Sunnis, as a backlash to that, form ISIS. And with respect to Turkey, they would, yeah, they would rather have the Islamists that they control, that they, they're Sunni. So, and Syria as well is a Sunni majority. Turkey is a Sunni majority. They're competing with Saudi Arabia for domination of the region. They're competing with Iran for domination of the region, and Iran is Shia. So they would rather have a Sunni strongman in power than they would, somebody who's a proxy of Iran or of other players in the region.
yeah, well, that's exactly what it boils down to. And at the end of the day, I might need to reread a history book, but last time I checked, in the past 20 or so years, there's not a great record of secular dictators being overthrown and the country's
Yeah.
improving. Libya, failed state with open slave markets. We all know how Iraq went
Mhm.
in the insurgency, ISIS after that. I guarantee you in 2 years, Syria is going to be in way worse shape than it is now, significantly worse. And there's 300,000 Christians there. And if we know anything, I mean, they're already executing people in the streets. They walked into a hospital and just shot people in their beds. This is no moderate, peace loving faction that has taken
Yeah.
over the country. It's going to be anarchy. And unfortunately, it's just crazy. Speaking of which, you know who Sam Goodwin is, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hockey buddy.
You should read his book because he
I
spent
know. I have
time.
it. I have it right over here.
He got
I'm like halfway through.
his, his,
It's
his
wild.
life story
Dude,
is
I played
absolutely
hockey with that
insane.
guy for a year before he even said anything about it. So that goes
That's
to
wild.
tell you, how that affected him. And it's just, I mean, I can't imagine being, I think it was like 35 days or something that he was,
Is a little over 2 months,
yeah,
and
that's,
he was held in the same prison. I think he said he believes. I don't know if he knows for sure, but he's fairly confident. He was held in the same prison that who Austin Tice is.
no.
He's the American they've been looking for like 12 years, and no one knows where he is. But they
Yeah.
think Assad had him. They've been talking about him a bunch. Biden's been talking about him a bunch publicly because they think Assad. They know he's alive. They think Assad had him the whole time because Assad's gone now. He
Mm,
can. They think they can get him, but Sam believes, if I recall correctly, and feel free if you're watching this to reach out. If not, that they were in the same prison,
I'll ask Sam.
not at the same time. I don't think they were in at the same time, but Austin was in the
Wow.
same prison compound that he was held in. He went to one that was really bad first, and I think that's the same one Austin was in, and then they
Mm.
moved him to like a different one in Damascus. But anyways, the serious stuff. If you're watching this, feel free to jump in the comments with what you think how that disaster is going to end. All right, let's take a little walk down memory lane with your glorious time at the caller.
This is
What
what
was
I've
your
been waiting for.
what was your favorite memory of working at the caller, and then what was your worst memory of working at the caller?
I I mean, my favorite memory was probably when the Showtime film crew came in to film
Man,
the Daily Caller, and we had our editorial meeting at 2:30 like we did every day. And afterwards, I had you, I think you were wearing a football helmet, if I remember
it was
correctly.
probably my Lions helmet,
Put on a football helmet,
which is literally sitting
and
right
uh,
here off
and
screen.
you were running fly routes down the hallway, and I was throwing football passes for the film crew, which didn't make the cut, unfortunately, because I threw a absolute roper that you caught. I remember, and that same hallway was also where our buddy Will Davis, who was I think
Broke
an
through,
intern
broke
at the
through the
time, yeah, he
wall.
took my electric skateboard and shattered through the wall. But my all-time, I guess it's my favorite memory just because it stands out in my mind. Um, Although at the time, I guess it was like a kind of a heavy moment. I was flying a little drone through the office. I don't know if you were there for this.
I wasn't. I know what you're about to tell.
I
I
was
heard
flying a
about it
drone
after the
through the
fact.
office and I was buzzing our editor in chief, Jeff, who now looking back, like it was kind of tormenting because the dude probably has PTSD. I mean, he was in Iraq, he was in Afghanistan, and I was buzzing him with this little drone and he was swinging at it and I was dodging it. And I went in for a low pass and it ended up catching him in the neck. And it hits him in the neck and he grabs the thing like a bug and just walks over right next to our CEO's office and punches a hole through the wall and drops the drone down the drywall and just goes back to his desk and continues typing. And like everybody in the newsroom was like silent. And I'm like trying to stifle my laughter. And all I did afterwards was take the YouTube plaque that we got, the little platinum YouTube plaque that we had gotten with the video team. So it was on my desk, like my favorite trophy. And I went over and I just drilled a hole in the wall and just put screw in and just hung the thing over the hole in the wall and went back to my desk and everyone was silent.
Oh man. Do you got any I was not there for that, but I obviously do remember. Do you have any horror stories that are funny that you can share?
Yeah, the time that I was building the studio and I was carrying all the wood into the studio and I got this massive splinter in the back of my head. And you wrote a whole article about how you performed emergency surgery and it was successful and yada, yada, yada. And I want PolitiFact or Pointer or one of those fact checkers to go in there and fact check you because 3 months later, there was still a splinter in the back of my head that I found. And I was like, there's a piece of wood still in that emergency surgery was BS.
Okay, I got to set the record straight. Half of what you're saying is true. There was another splinter that you
There
found
were,
after the
you
fact.
extracted one of the splinters,
I
not all
did.
of them. That's
So
what a
so
surgery is supposed to do.
this is a true story for the viewers. Richie was hit in the back of the head by a 2x4.
It like slid down and it
It
just
like slid
split.
down and came under your skin up the back of your skull. It was a legitimate serious head wound.
Huge.
And instead of Richie going to the hospital, which is what he probably should have done, I took, well,
I
I
hate
first got a
hospitals.
first aid. I first got the first aid kit, and the pliers in there were so shitty, you made of plastic, I couldn't grip anything. So my dad's a veterinarian, by the way.
Use the pliers.
So I used someone else's, I used a woman's like industrial grade tweezers and felt around your skull until I could feel the pieces of wood. I pulled out two pieces. It is true I missed
The
one,
third piece that was
but
quite
I
large.
asked you if I had gotten it all, and
Like,
if where you've
I
been
don't know,
hit. You
dude.
said yes.
That was yet another like concussion moment. I mean, you can't
Also,
have.
I'm pretty sure Neil was not happy when he found out that instead of going to the doctors, we just pulled wood out of your
Well, you
head
know what
on
Neil
a
was happy
table.
about was how cheap that studio was because I built it myself. He was happy about that.
That was a good studio. That was a good studio.
Good
Um,
enough for government work.
would you say that working at the Daily Caller was kind of like going to boot camp? It's just kind of like the
Yeah,
most
except everyone's dumber and drunker. It's the
oh
only
yeah, the
difference.
alcohol situation at the well, everyone liked to have a good time. Well, I don't know if
Yeah, we
we
can
should
leave it
go
at that.
I
We
don't know
can
if we
leave
should
it
go
at
past that, but
that.
man, you got to write a book. Your next book after you're done writing bestsellers about all this serious stuff. We need to write a tell-all of the
It's
caller
a sitcom. It needs to be a sitcom.
from 2015, so 2 years before you got there. From 2015 through about 2020 when everyone left and everyone went on like COVID.
2 year sabbatical.
Yeah, like that 5 year period. I think if you told the full 5 year story, no one would believe you. People would read that book and be like, this has to be made up. This has to be fiction.
Yeah.
But it's not. Like you look at the cast of characters from 2015, 16, 17, and then you look at where those same people are now,
Yeah.
no one
That's
would believe
crazy.
you.
It's
No
true.
one would believe you.
I
But
know.
it's a
I
100%
capture
true.
some of that in the book. I definitely have a fair number of flashbacks to the Trump years, and there's yeah, hilarity ensues.
I do got to reference it because you brought it up. The last day before COVID, when we all, I mean, that was when we went to like Ruby Chris, then we went to District
Yeah,
Anchor.
Ruth Chris. Yeah,
Yeah, and we were all like, maybe
we're
tickets.
like, there's a pandemic.
Yeah,
Let's go to a bar and get drunk and breathe all over each other.
literally, it was. We don't know when these bars are ever going to be open again.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we
It's
might.
wild.
So
Like,
we
seems like a
might.
dream. Really
I
does.
know. It's like I can't believe all that happened. I remember the first time we got back together, a couple of us who lived in Arlington at the time went to Ragtime for lunch one day because we had that lunch group. Remember the old lunch group?
Yeah, the lunch group.
Don't say the name of the lunch group, but the
Yeah,
lunch group.
yeah,
And we hadn't seen each other in like 2 months because no restaurants or bars were open. And then finally Ragtime opened. We went and it was like you felt like it was surreal that we just
yeah.
hadn't seen each other for 2 months.
I mean, that's why the book is called Riot Diet, because when we were on the road, you couldn't eat everything was closed. And so you had to, we'd eat when you could. We had crazy hours. And so it was always fast food. So the Riot Diet is like, getting McDonald's at 12 a.m. after a riot. And that's also what people were consuming. Everybody was locked down at home. And that's what I'm trying to capture is like how crazy it was to just everybody's got to stay home. Y'all got to stay in your apartments. You can't even, like, you have to cover your face with a diaper if you go outside, even if you're outside and you're not near anybody. And what happens when you make people do that for a couple of months? The answer is they go crazy and then they hit the streets and chaos unfolds.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm glad you wrote the book. It's called Riot Diet. Again, you can buy it on Amazon. I suggest that you do.
Bookstores too now. We're on
Before I
bookstores.
let Richie go, I gotta embarrass him just a little bit because we are very good friends. People won't know this, but Richie is actually an incredible singer, and I have videos on my phone of him doing karaoke. And I'm telling
Blink
you all,
182. Or is it
no,
DMX? Ja
it
Rule?
was. I've never seen you. I've seen you do
What would I
DMX
be without
songs.
my baby?
It's that old rock song, Candy and
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. It was Marcy Playground. I smell sex and
there you go. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the one we filmed.
uh,
I think that was the last time we were ever. That was the last time we were ever at Recessions. I think I took that video before we all split up. So as talented as a writer as Richie is, he's actually a significantly more impressive singer. And I'll be seeing you at the at an undisclosed Christmas party coming up here
yes.
soon. So
Yeah.
maybe we'll
Oh,
do a
and it
little.
may or may not have karaoke.
It may or may not have karaoke. Well, Richie, this has been a blast. This was really cool. I'm glad that it's kind of wild that we were able to, not just talk about your life story with the rides, but take a little fun trip down memory lane. And hard to
Sure.
believe we first met. Now it would be 7 years ago,
Hookstead was
over
about
seven.
60 pounds heavier and drinking 6 Mountain Dews a day.
I was drinking 8 Mountain Dews a day.
Oh
Yeah,
my
for
goodness.
those of you who don't know, I
The
used to
amount
be
of
fat as
sugar,
hell.
dude. That is like 300 grams of sugar a day
Oh,
right
I
there.
think it's even
Just
I think
on
it's even
Mountain
more
Dew.
than that. It's a can of Mountain Dew. A can of Mountain Dew is 170 calories. So you'd be doing what?
I think it's at
1356.
least 40 grams of sugar.
It's so
And
bad for
chugging
you.
a bottle of maple syrup every day.
It's so bad. Anyways, all right. Well, I'll see you tomorrow then.
Yeah.
Let me
Undisclosed location.
yeah, at an undisclosed location we can't get into here.
It's a
Everyone
bunker.
go buy Richie's book. I've read it. It's absolutely outstanding.